Most AFSLs are still relying on a 5 file review model. It's predictable, it's familiar, and it's giving business owners a completely false sense of comfort. I'm Selin Ertac, Director of Tangelo Advice Consulting, and today I'm joined by Paula Draney, one of our senior consultants who specialises in monitoring and supervision uplift, to talk about what's broken and what better actually looks like in our industry. Welcome, Paula. Paula, when we walk into an advice business, whether it's an AFSL or an advice practice, what are the biggest issues we see with traditional monitoring and supervision?
I still think one of the biggest things that I still see is those ticker box checklists where we ask those surface level questions without the real rationalization of what is it we're actually doing for the client? What's the advice? For example, so often do I see, is there a fact find or a file note on the file? And the answer is yes or no, but we don't actually look at the content of that fact find or that file note. For example, one of the key themes I see a lot is inconsistent information that just doesn't seem logical, that no one has picked up on because we've just gone, yes, there's a file note or a fact find. The other thing as well is using AI tools to do a shortcut, thinking AI is going to pick up all the things that we might be looking for. But similar to that, there's a critical thinking component that doesn't come with the AI tool. And then lastly, a lot of times I see licensees thinking that everything's great because they don't hear anything, they're safe, we don't have any concerns, nothing ever gets identified. I actually think that's the opposite. Because if you don't hear anything, people do genuinely make mistakes and things happen, and the industry is constantly changing. So to expect that nothing is happening as we go through change all the time is probably more of a red flag than safety.
Beautiful. And so you've probably touched on this a little bit, but when we're looking at it from a commercial perspective, what's the commercial risk for business owners who keep doing monitoring and supervision the old-fashioned way, which is pick 5 files, maybe once a year, twice if you're feeling extra ambitious? What are the risks around that?
I think one of the biggest call outs that in all the ASIC reports, they always say do everything to size, complexity, and scale of your business. Yet we seem to have this model to go, let's just do 5 for everyone. And we look at it the same way rather than thinking about how do we use our resources in the right way, in the right places. So really thinking about where should I be structuring that monitoring and supervision? Where is really my highest risk in looking at that? The other thing as well is, a lot of times advisors don't want to make a mistake. They genuinely make a mistake because they misunderstand something, and it's something that's gone wrong in the process that's repeated.
Yep.
So then from a commercial perspective, it's not just one thing you're fixing, it's likely something that's been repeated for quite some time. So it's really, how do you get those trends to
Mhm.
tell you that before that
Yep.
happens? Yeah.
And we often talk about a risk-based monitoring and supervision program. Just dispel that myth. What does a modern risk-based monitoring and supervision program actually look like?
So I think it's really around finding out where your risk sits. And it really comes down to data. A lot of things that you do in the business, you have the data. Thinking about where am I getting delayed in my service delivery, for example, an ongoing service? Is there potentially some advisors that take longer to deliver an advice process? What are the key things in your business from a service perspective that you have some concerns around? All that data is there, and it's just bringing it together to sort of go, where have I got delays? Where have I potentially got things taking longer than it should? But it's not just from an advisor perspective, but it's identifying key themes from an advisor risk perspective by clients as well. You might have high risk clients, in certain areas that might be a data component that you might feed into that. What are some of the incidents or breaches that might be coming through? And is there a key thing towards a client type or an advisor type? And that allows you to build a bit of an advisor score or a monitoring score to go, where am I going to spend most of my time from a risk perspective, and really deep diving those themes.
Which then replaces that ticker box approach that we were talking about, where every single advisor and every single client in the business gets assessed using the same stock standard checklist, where you're actually almost customizing your monitoring and supervision to be more, like you said, alluded to, risk-based. And some of those risks, I think we can also identify based on what ASIC is focusing in on and what they're finding out about other businesses who maybe don't have a robust monitoring and supervision program.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I will call out from a risk perspective, a lot of times, and I think I'm going back to those checklists at the beginning as well, is we've identified an issue, but we don't identify where the issue went wrong. So I'll go back to the file note. We might call out there wasn't a file note on the file.
Yeah.
So then you might go, you need to write a file note. But have we actually identified if those conversations are happening?
Yeah.
Writing a
Yep.
file note on conversations that are not happening is not fixing the root cause. So it's like, how do we get to that data? That's the thematic data you want to get to.
And probably something that I do want to touch on is where businesses have got their own internal monitoring and supervisory functions. Maybe it's your paraplanners or your practice managers or your compliance managers. Can we delve a little bit into that as well? I think it's a really effective use of resources, but what are the risks in that particular model that businesses should also be aware of?
Yeah, and look, I'll probably go a little bit back towards that risk-based model as well, is you can really effectively use your resources internally to do a bit of pre-vet rather than a 5 file review is a post-vet. It's after. Everything's already fallen off the cliff. We want to
Hmm.
catch it before
Yeah.
before it gets to the cliff. And pre-vet's really good process to do that internally, and that sort of helps identify the risk before it happens. However, the thing is, a lot of times businesses can be quite insular
Yeah.
around their teams and the expectations that they have within that business rather than that broader view. And that's a bit of a risk when you're using internal resources around, are your internal resources really calibrated? I think there's a point of view to think about checking the checker. And it's not about that they're not capable of what they're doing, but it's to calibrate the thinking to make sure those checklists are updated regularly, calibrating the thinking of what the expectations are across the broader industry rather than within that business, and really going through those cases and making them empowered to call out things as well, to go, hey, I'm not sure how to deal with this case. Can we discuss that? I think one of the biggest things that I hear from advisors a lot is I keep getting different answers.
Yes.
When I get something looked at, whoever looks at it differently, I get a different answer of what I need to do, and it creates real misunderstanding. And that really comes down to the interpretation of what do I think I should be checking versus what I actually should be checking, and really that calibration. And I think that's where the QA or checking the checker helps, and it also empowers and uplifts the checkers themselves.
Yeah, fantastic. Obviously, AI is in everything that we're doing, and a lot of businesses are either buying or utilizing AI tools to help them with their monitoring and supervision activity, whether that's something that they're building in-house or outsourcing to a provider. Where does AI genuinely help? And I guess what are some of the things that we need to be conscious of in using AI for the purpose of monitoring and supervision?
I think AI is fantastic for the triaging and really that theme detection. So I always talk about use AI for the purpose of exception identification. Again, with the checklist is we expect the parameters to be within this, but if it falls out of that, it can create themes and great reporting and triaging. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be able to assess and have that critical thinking component to that exception to go and where did it go wrong. So that's where the human element comes in. So it's about saving time, working together, not about replacing the human, I would say.
Yeah, and that's a really good call out too. So again, that false sense of security. And I think we've got this myth in this industry where we just think about audit as the only monitoring and supervision activity. So you've got some businesses that maybe are having 100% of their advice files pre-vetted using AI or technology, which is, okay, great. It's one control, but it doesn't uncover absolutely every risk from a monitoring and supervision perspective that can happen in a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I talk about this a lot. I think monitoring and supervision is quite misunderstood. As you said, just the file audit is your
Yeah.
monitoring and supervision. What most businesses do is they monitor continuously, but they're not using that information for the purpose of monitoring. Yes, your file reviews are your supervision, but most businesses will have monitoring around their ongoing service deliveries, making sure that we're getting those things done. They'll have processes and controls in place where they're expected to stay within certain boundaries within a process, for example, workflows in Xplan. That data is actually monitoring at a level. And again, how do you bring that together to go? It's not about looking at all the data. You want to build that data as your exception. So anything that falls around outside those parameters of what's expected, that becomes your monitoring. So it's again, how do I get exception-based reporting out of that? That all feeds into your monitoring and supervision. I think that what we've been talking about all goes back up into that risk-based reporting to go, what are those key themes?
Yeah.
And then when I'm actually doing detecting, because these are all realistically preventative types of controls, then when I have to resort to, I got to do some detecting to see what's going wrong, where it's going wrong, that audit, we can actually focus on those exceptions rather than I'll just randomly select 5 things. They may be good, they may be bad, but we're not actually targeting where that emerging risk might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to clarify the point, we're not actually alluding to doing more either. We're just
No,
looking at focusing on the right areas and doing them well versus having to look at every single file where there may actually be no risks. And therefore, you're not
absolutely.
really mitigating or uncovering anything useful anyway.
Absolutely. And then you can focus on the advisors that are extremely knowledgeable and they're high performing,
Yeah.
let them go about doing what they're doing. There's obviously not limited risk detection,
Yeah.
but you can support and uplift the advisors that need that extra support. The other thing is I find that people get concerned around, oh, if I support one advisor more than another, do they feel targeted? It's not about feeling targeted. It's about actually enabling them. It's about supporting and coaching them. So I think we really need to think about monitoring from a coaching framework, not a consequence management perspective. And we're doing them a disservice if they've got a misunderstanding and we don't help solve that, because for them, that's going to be a bigger issue to solve with their clients down the track.
Yeah, and it becomes quite confusing too for advisors to make sense of what they're meant to do. I think sometimes so much compliance related information is thrown at them, sometimes inconsistently, as you've alluded to. So they actually
Correct.
tie themselves up in knots. So they know what they need to be doing, but then they're constantly second guessing themselves. And I think that's where
Correct.
we see advisors and businesses trip up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where this one size fits all approach is a bit of a disservice to
Yep,
advisors,
agreed.
particularly ones that need that extra support or in that space, they just need to build their confidence back up.
Yeah. So we've covered a bit of ground, but if someone is watching, whether they're in a licensee or an advice business and wants to improve their monitoring and supervision, what are the top 3 things they should do first?
So I would say we've spoken about it, but I'd definitely say this advisor risk score based approach. Dedicate your resources where your risk is or where the support's required. Again, I call it support. Also think about refreshing your question set. Really think about, am I actually analyzing the right outcomes for the client in this versus am I just checking a process? I think they're 2 very different things. And then also quality assurance on your internal teams. Again, give them the support to get external views, calibrate, so they don't have to, make decisions in silos.
Yeah, good point. So, overall, what we're basically saying is if your monitoring and supervision program is based on tradition rather than risk, or it's not giving you the insights that you need to run a safe, scalable advice business, that's pretty much the work that we do every day at Tangelo. So, please feel free to reach out if you want a sounding board to test your monitoring and supervision approach to make sure it's more effective. Thank you so much, Paula, for joining me.
Thank you, Selin.